Hi and welcome to Tutorial 14, Essay Writing for the Main Body. This tutorial will provide you with advice and tips for writing the main body of essays. So by the end of the tutorial you should know the purpose of the main body of essays, the main sections that make up the main body, and the most important aspects of the main body and what the marker is looking for. Returning to the diagram that we briefly looked at in the last tutorial, you can see that the main body of the essay follows on from the introduction. The main body of your essay should be a series of linked paragraphs, each one dealing with a different aspect of the topic, but still remaining connected to the central theme. The purpose of this section is to develop the key idea of the essay by drawing on the evidence. As shown in the diagram, the main body of an essay consists of a background section and development of the key idea. So we'll consider these two sections in this tutorial. In the tutorial on writing the introduction, we were able to provide a template that you can use to structure almost any introduction. But because the structure of the main body of an essay depends on the essay question, it's obviously not possible to provide a similar kind of template for this part of an essay, which does make the main body the hardest part of an essay to write. Before we look specifically at the different sections of the main body, the background and the development of the key idea, here are a few tips to bear in mind relating to structuring the main body. Firstly, never launch straight into writing. Always take time to plan out what you want to say and how you're going to put it together, because this will really help you organise what you want to say. We'll consider planning the structure later in this tutorial. And secondly, don't fall into the trap of providing a report rather than an essay. A report will typically include headings, subheadings, and possibly bullet point summaries, but an essay should be presented in continuous prose without headings. Because you're expected to explain points in detail in an essay, bullet points aren't acceptable. Of course, you can always start off using headings to help you come up with a plan, or use them as working titles, but they shouldn't appear in your final version of your essay. The main body of most essays will start with a section that sets the scene or covers some of the background information. You might be wondering why this information wouldn't go in the introduction, but remember that the introduction should be quite concise. It might contain some background information, but it shouldn't go into detail. In the first section of the main body of your essay, you can go into a bit more detail in this. Again, the kind of information to be included in this section will depend on the essay question, but typical examples include things like a brief summary of the history of the topic, definitions of relevant concepts, and background statistics that might be relevant. So let's consider an example. Consider the question, critically analyse theories of domestic violence. The main focus of your essay should be on analysing the theories that exist for domestic violence, but you wouldn't want to immediately launch into discussing this. You'd first of all want to provide some background information to set the scene. This kind of information could include a definition of domestic violence, a historical overview of domestic violence, and maybe some statistics relating to who's affected. You might think that some of this kind of information is obvious and that your reader might already know it, but you should never assume that the reader knows what you know. Even if they're an expert in the field, your job is still to put together a well thought out essay that includes some straightforward, descriptive background information. A very common mistake to make with essay writing is to get carried away when writing the background information. This is often because the background stuff is quite easy to write since it's descriptive rather than analytical. It would actually be really easy to write an entire essay based on background information, but the background section shouldn't go overboard on the detail. It can certainly be more than a paragraph long, and even up to a page depending on the length of the essay, but it certainly shouldn't dominate the main body. Remember that most academic essays will require you to discuss or to critically analyse, so the marker's looking to see that you've done this in your essay rather than simply provide pages of background information that might well be relevant, but that don't actually answer the question. Once you've written the background section of your essay, you're ready to get into the key idea section, which is where you'll answer the question and gain most of your marks. Now, this is the biggest and most important part of your essay, and it's important that you plan how you're going to structure this section. If you've done enough of the right reading, you should have a good idea of what needs to go in this section. Also, if you broke the question down into sub-questions and did your reading around those sub-questions, you should hopefully find that you can form a structure from the information you've collected. If that doesn't work for you though, an alternative approach is to take a blank piece of paper and write down all the key points from your reading randomly on the page. You can then look for links between the different points that you've written down by drawing lines between them, and in this way you can form categories or clusters of similar points that can be then used to form the different headings of the key idea section of your essay. In many essay questions though, structure will come to you intuitively. Let's go back to our example and consider how we would structure the section that develops the key idea. Once the writer had written the background section to this essay, the key idea section would focus on the different theories. Remember that critical analysis will involve some description, but it is really looking for you to compare and contrast and to consider the strengths and weaknesses of the evidence. So let's say you identified 4 theories of domestic violence in your reading. As shown in the diagram, the key idea section of the main body in this essay might involve describing each theory, then considering the evidence that supports the theory and the strengths and weaknesses of the theory. You might repeat this for each theory and then write a section that brings together what you've written, comparing the different theories and making some kind of judgment on them based on the evidence you noted in your reading. This summary section would then mark the end of your analysis and main body of your essay. To explain this further, we'll provide some examples of wording you might use in the next slide. But first, pause the video and read through this slide to make sure that you follow the suggested structure. By now you should have a good idea of how you might structure the main body of an essay. You might still be wondering though, what kind of wording should I use to put the different sections together? This slide gives you an example of this based on the structure suggested in the previous slide. Pause the video and take your time to read through the slide, noting the wording that the writer has used to incorporate evidence, to make comparisons and to highlight strengths and limitations.